Listen close, folks, because I'm about to spin you a tale of heartbreak, secrets, and unexpected redemption set against the dusty plains of the American West. It's a story about a young woman who traveled thousands of miles to wed a rancher she'd never seen, only to spurn him at first sight. But fate had other ideas, twisted ones. When her little sister stepped into her boots, the entire ranch was thrown into chaos. Alliances were forged, betrayal reared its head, and a tight-lipped cowboy or two held answers that could shatter the foundations of a family. Ready yourselves. This is no ordinary frontier romance. Margaret Maggie O'Donnell was not the first young woman in her county to consider a mail-order match, but she was certainly the most reluctant. Back in 1878, in a sleepy coastal town in Massachusetts, she was a teacher's assistant, barely making enough to support herself. Her father, Patrick O'Donnell, had passed away the previous year, leaving behind an ailing mother, Catherine, and two younger sisters, Delilah and Josephine. It was Delilah, bright and hopeful at 18, who first spotted the advertisement in a local newspaper. Amid the usual listings for housekeeping services and farmland for sale, was a carefully penned inquiry from a Texan rancher seeking a wife. The rancher's name was Randall Beringer, and his note painted the portrait of a prosperous man-owner of Golden Briar Ranch nestled in the dusty outskirts of Amarillo. The advertisement spoke of wide pastures, blossoming orchards, and an expansive, bustling homestead. It conjured an image of possibility, far from the bleak New England winter wind. Maggie, being the eldest at 21, had assumed the role of head of the family in every practical sense after their father's passing. She was the one who trudged through the Massachusetts snow to collect the coal ration, paid the small mortgage on their cottage, and negotiated with local merchants so they could survive each frigid month. And so when Delilah pressed the advertisement upon her eyes, brimming with naive excitement, Maggie initially dismissed it out of hand. She wasn't about to uproot her life simply to become some stranger's wife, no matter how glowing the claims of prosperity. But harsh truths have a way of warping convictions. The O'Donnell home was on the verge of foreclosure. Catherine's health deteriorated more with each passing day. Maggie's meager earnings as a teacher's assistant could barely cover rent, let alone doctor's bills. Delilah and Josephine's part-time seamstress work brought in a pittance. Letters to distant relatives had yielded no offers of support. In early March of that year, a neighbor, good old Mrs. Abernathy, leaned over the back fence and remarked that Wyatt Earp himself was rumored to have traveled across the frontier under mail-order arrangements. Of course, that was more gossip than fact, but it still colored Delilah's imagination. Mail-order marriages, she proclaimed, aren't just for desperate folks. Adventurers do it too. Maggie was far from an adventurer, but with finances on the brink, she allowed curiosity to nudge her. She penned a tentative letter to Randall Beringer, offering only the barest details of her life, that she was a dedicated woman of quiet means, devoted to family, capable of reading and writing and willing to help manage household affairs if needed. She did not mention that she had never traveled farther than Boston in her entire life. She did not say how exhausted she felt each day, or how her heart beat faster with each new wave of responsibility. To her surprise, a reply arrived in just 2 weeks. The stationery was thick, the handwriting large and florid. Randall Beringer described his ranch with poetic flourish, rolling plains that sparkled like gold at sunset. A main house with red-painted walls and white shutters that caught the breeze of each dusty afternoon. There were fruit trees, peaches, and plums that blossomed in spring. He wrote that he possessed her letter on his writing desk for a week, rereading each line. He mentioned a local reference, Dr. Hiram Black, who had once practiced in Boston before settling in Texas to be closer to his aging parents. He even name-dropped a political figure, President Rutherford B. Hayes, as a sign of his own patriotism and civic awareness. It was strange but oddly comforting to see such specifics, giving Maggie a window into the seriousness of his intentions. For 2 months, letters flew back and forth. The more Maggie learned, the more she felt an odd, reluctant hope. Randall sounded genuine, stable, well-spoken and wealthier than anyone she had ever met. Perhaps there was a future for her family in Texas. One day, the final letter arrived. He asked for Maggie's hand in marriage. He would supply the funds for her journey and promised a respectable, comfortable life. The decision was not made lightly. Through tears and anxious nights, Maggie weighed her love and obligations to her family against her fear of the unknown. With her mother's uncertain health with the mortgage looming, she found she had no other choice but to accept. And so the day came when she kissed Catherine's brow, hugged Delilah and Josephine close, and climbed aboard a crowded train bound for the Wild West, heart in her throat, destiny uncertain. Little did Maggie know that while she was steeling herself for a grand new life as a mail-order bride, the rancher who awaited her, Randall Beringer, wasn't quite the man she had imagined from those letters. Whether he was kindly or cruel handsome, or homely wealthy, or near bankrupt, remained a mystery. And the greatest surprise of all was one she could never have predicted, that the man she had traveled so far to marry would lead her down a road of deception and heartbreak, a road that would eventually force a twist so bizarre it could only happen in the raw, unpredictable expanse of the American West. Maggie's train rolled into Amarillo on a scorching afternoon. The year was well into its warmer months, and she nearly swooned stepping from the cool interior of the carriage into the blazing sun. Though she tried to shield her eyes with a small parasol, the heat still assaulted her senses. Dry dust hung in the air, and every breath tasted of a world far from the Atlantic's salt-laced breezes. According to Randall's letter, he would meet her at the station's platform. Clutching her small trunk, Maggie scanned the crowd. What she expected was a tall, robust man, in a cowboy hat maybe, with piercing eyes and a confident stride. After all, he had mentioned once that he oversaw over 2,000 head of cattle. A man who tamed such an expanse must be powerful, broad-shouldered, certain of himself. Instead, she saw a short, stout figure in a stained canvas coat that strained against an ample belly. His face was flushed, and he dabbed sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. A wide-brimmed hat wobbled precariously atop a head of thinning, sandy brown hair. As Maggie locked eyes with this figure, he offered the biggest, toothiest grin. In spite of her shock, she recognized him from the photograph he'd enclosed with one of his letters. Except the man in the photo had been angled to disguise most of his corpulence. This was indeed Randall Beringer, the man who had asked for her hand. He waddled forward, hand extended. "Miss O'Donnell." He was polite, though obviously nervous, and the look in his eyes was a complicated mix of relief and admiration. Maggie forced a strained smile. His imposing weight wasn't an issue for her. She had no illusions about superficial appearances, but there was something in the way he seemed out of breath after a few steps that put her off. Where was the robust, energetic rancher she had imagined? "I hope the journey wasn't too unpleasant," Randall managed, voice trembling with excitement. "It was fine, Mr. Beringer," Maggie replied softly. She took his arm with polite uncertainty. His palm was clammy, but his manner was otherwise gracious, almost gallant. He led her through the station to a waiting wagon. 2 horses with dusty, tired coats were hitched up front, occasionally stamping their hooves against the sun-hardened ground. Randall introduced them as Daisy and Clover. Maggie mustered a polite nod. He then loaded her trunk into the back, rummaging with difficulty, breathing heavily as he arranged her belongings. She offered to help, but he insisted on handling it himself. The journey from Amarillo to Golden Briar Ranch took nearly 3 hours. Past rolling plains and scattered tumbleweeds, Maggie found herself lulled by the rhythmic clopping of horseshoes. In that quiet, Randall attempted small talk, mentioning the ranch's workforce, comprised of a dozen ranch hands, stable boys, and a housekeeper named Esther. He asked about Massachusetts, about her family's well-being, about her father's passing. Although the conversation was polite, Maggie sensed a deeper anxiety in him, as if he worried that any minor detail might cause her to flee. When they finally arrived, Golden Briar Ranch was indeed large, but Maggie noticed areas of disrepair. The main house was expansive but needed a fresh coat of paint. Shutters hung crooked in places. The orchards existed, but from a distance she could see some trees were withered. The fences were aging, some barely upright. Cattle meandered in a series of corrals, not the free-roaming herds she had envisioned. It was a place of potential, yes, but also a place that looked like it had weathered difficult times. Randall seemed to sense her hesitation, clearing his throat nervously. I know it might not look like the picture in my letters. We had a nasty drought last year, and I had to invest a lot of funds in feed and water transport. But things are turning around, you'll see. The orchard will bear fruit in a month or 2, I'm sure of it. Maggie forced a small smile. She wasn't about to judge a man on a single glance. I'm sure you've worked hard, she said. It's bigger than anything I've ever known. They unloaded the trunk into the main house. The interior was grander than the exterior suggested, with a wide foyer, polished wooden floors, and a parlor decorated with plush settees. But there was also a slight odor in the air, something sour and stale, as if the rooms hadn't been aired out for ages. Esther, the housekeeper, bustled in to greet them, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman, with streaks of grey in her hair, and she wore a guarded expression that flickered between curiosity and apprehension. Clearly she wanted to see who Randall had brought home. Miss O'Donnell, Randall said, turning to Maggie with an attempt at a confident flourish. Welcome to Golden Briar Ranch. I hope you will be content here, as I intend to make this our home. He swallowed hard, eyes uncertain. The question hovered. Would she truly marry him after seeing all this? Maggie felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She was exhausted, parched by the journey, disillusioned by the difference between the man she'd built in her mind and the man before her. Still, her family's survival hinged on her forging a life here. Moreover, something about Randall, his anxious sincerity, the warm glint in his eyes, made her want to give him a chance. She nodded, forcing a brightness to her tone she didn't fully feel. Thank you, Mr. Beringer. It's a lot to take in, but I'm grateful to be here. Thus began her first evening in the promised land of the Texas frontier. Little did she know that this was only the calm before a storm of trials, secrets that would unravel her sense of responsibility, shatter illusions, and set in motion events that none of them could have foreseen. Over the next few days, Maggie tried to settle into the ranch's rhythms. Dawn broke early in Texas, the sun rising with a fiery brilliance that crept across the plains. Randall would stir around that time, but never as swiftly as the ranch hands who rose long before sunrise. Maggie often found him rummaging for coffee in the kitchen, looking groggy, She realized with some surprise that he preferred overseeing paperwork and finances in his study, rather than patrolling the range or tending cattle. It seemed he left the actual ranching to his foreman, a gruff but capable cowboy named Gil Travis. Gil was a wiry man with sun-leathered skin and a perpetual squint. He regarded Maggie with polite caution, tipping his hat whenever their paths crossed. He spoke little, but she gleaned that he had worked at Golden Briar Ranch for nearly 8 years, long enough to recall better times. Mr. Beringer's pa was the real horseman, Gil commented once. Traveled with Buffalo Bill Cody's show in his youth, or so the story goes. Brought the money back here, built this place. Randall's done his best, I suppose. Maggie began to see that the ranch's success had once been unstoppable, but was now wavering. Weather-related disasters, a volatile cattle market, and Randall's own inexperience were taking their toll. Despite all that, Randall tried to maintain a veneer of prosperity and optimism. He showered Maggie with small gestures. He bought her a new pair of boots, gave her a turquoise pendant he claimed once belonged to his grandmother, and assured her that a wedding ceremony would follow in a matter of weeks once she felt more settled. But beneath his hopeful front, Maggie sensed an undercurrent of desperation. She saw it in his eyes whenever he inquired about her comfort, as though dreading that she might decide to leave. She heard it in the way he bragged about upcoming ventures like the orchard's next harvest, or a new contract to supply beef to the railroad grand schemes that might or might not come to fruition. Nevertheless, Maggie also discovered acts of kindness. She noticed the workers' loyalty to Randall. Esther, though stern, spoke of how he once paid her son's medical bills when he broke his leg. Another hand mentioned that Randall occasionally forgave wages owed to him at the local feed store. Clearly, for all his flaws, the man had a warm spirit. Maggie was torn between empathy and disappointment, wanting to see him succeed, but also feeling a gnawing fear that her family back in Massachusetts was depending on a promise that might not hold. Late one afternoon, after helping Esther with some light chores around the kitchen, Maggie stepped outside to watch the sunset. Texas sunsets. She had to admit were unlike any she'd witnessed before. Waves of gold, orange, and crimson painted the horizon. Leaning on a wooden rail, she breathed in the dusty scent of the yard and let her mind wander. That was when Randall approached from behind, clearing his throat. She turned to see him holding a sheet of paper. His expression was tinged with anxiety. "Maggie, I got a telegram from Boston." He handed it to her. It was from her sister Delilah, though the words were few. "Ma is unwell. Doctor says serious. We are struggling. We need money. Please advise. Love, Delilah." Maggie's heart sank. Her eyes prickling with tears. She had only been gone a short while, and already her worst fear was materializing. Catherine's fragile health was taking a turn. "I need to go home," she murmured, panic seizing her. Randall's hand shot out to grip her shoulder, gentle yet urgent. "You can't travel alone like that, not all the way to Massachusetts. That's such a long journey back, and expensive, too. Didn't we discuss how this was your new life? Your family is welcome here, but I can't just abandon them," she said, voice cracking. She felt the same sense of suffocating obligation that had sent her on this mail-order path to begin with. Her family needed her. She had come here for their sake. Yet ironically, she was powerless to help them when they needed immediate care. Randall nodded rapidly, sweat beading on his brow even though the evening had cooled. I know. Let me think. Money is tied up right now, but I'll figure something out. Maybe a wire transfer from the local bank, or I'll see if I can sell a few more cattle quickly. Please, Maggie, just give me a few days. We can gather enough to send them what they need. Then if it's truly dire, we'll arrange something else. Maggie clung to that small hope. She had come here to make life better for her family, not to cut herself off from them. So she forced a nod and tried to hold back tears. All right. A few days. Randall exhaled, relieved. We're in this together. Once we're married, your family is my family too. We'll send for them if need be. But as Randall hurried away to draft letters and telegrams, an uncomfortable knot formed in Maggie's stomach. Her illusions about an easy life at Golden Briar were crumbling. She realized that her acceptance of his proposal had created a deeper entanglement than she'd imagined. If the ranch was already financially strained, would Randall truly be able to help her mother? What if Catherine needed immediate care that cost more than the ranch could manage? A week passed with agonizing slowness. Maggie waited for news from Massachusetts and for Randall to secure the promised funds. Anxiety curled inside her chest each morning as she hurried to the telegraph office in town. The clerk, a somber man named Mr. Avery, would peer over his glasses and shake his head when no telegram arrived. She would then ride back to the ranch, dust swirling in her wake, heart heavier than before. Randall worked feverishly to gather money. He sold a handful of cattle to a local butcher, at a cut rate tried to expedite a shipment of orchard peaches to nearby restaurants, and even rummaged through the ranch's attic for items he could pawn. Maggie was both touched and alarmed by his desperation. Touched that he was so willing to help, alarmed because it seemed less like a capable rancher's easy generosity and more like a last-ditch effort. By midweek, he had scrounged up enough to wire $50 to Boston. It was not a fortune, but it might pay for a decent doctor's visit. Maggie was grateful, though a sinking feeling told her the O'Donnells would require more if Catherine's condition persisted. Each night, she found herself praying by the window the vast Texan sky overhead, calling silently for strength and direction. Then came the afternoon when Randall asked her in a halting, nervous voice to postpone the wedding for another month. They were seated in the parlor, a tidy room with a lace-draped sofa and walls decorated with old family portraits. He'd been clearing his throat all morning, as though working up to some confession. "I'm sorry, Maggie," he said, wringing his hat in his hands. "I want to marry you soon, truly. But things at the ranch, they aren't as stable as I'd hoped. I need a bit more time to put my affairs in order, and to ensure your mother's situation is addressed. I'd like to see if your sisters might be able to travel here eventually." She stared at him, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest. This man, her fiancé, had promised a swift ceremony, a secure home. Was that promise unraveling? Perhaps it was better this way, she told herself. A hasty wedding might trap her in a life overshadowed by ever-mounting debt. "I understand," she replied quietly. "I appreciate your honesty." He sagged in relief, but she caught a flicker in his eyes, fear. Randall Beringer was afraid. Was it fear that she might discover the ranch's precarious state, or fear that she might leave before he had the chance to make things right? As the days turned to weeks, Maggie's doubts grew. She was in effect a guest in this house, albeit one who was expected to marry its owner. She helped Esther in the kitchen, read books in the study, accompanied Randall into town for supplies. Each day was a test of patience, overshadowed by the uncertain future. Esther's curt manner melted little by little, showing glimpses of a maternal side. She once brought Maggie a plate of freshly baked cornbread without being asked. "I figure you must miss the taste of home," she muttered, eyes averted. "Not that cornbread's like anything you all have up north, but it's warm, at least." It was the first time Maggie saw a spark of genuine warmth in Esther's face. Out in the stables, Gil and the other hands offered her polite conversation. She learned to brush down the horses and even tried her hand at milking the ranch's lone dairy cow. The tasks were new and strange, but she found a certain comfort in honest physical work. Yet at night, when the ranch hushed into the chirping of crickets, Maggie felt lost. Her mother's health, her sister's future, the impending wedding. Nothing was certain. She found herself writing letters to Delilah, searching for answers to questions she could not articulate. Meanwhile, no word came from her sisters about whether the $50 had arrived or how Catherine fared. The telegraph office remained silent. Early one morning, just before sunrise, Maggie ventured out for a walk by the orchard. The air was cool, a respite before the punishing Texan sun rose high. Rows of peach and plum trees stretched before her, half of them leafless or bearing shriveled fruit. She knelt to pick up a fallen peach, bruised and half rotted. A metaphor for the ranch, she thought grimly. Suddenly, she noticed a figure stepping out from behind a tree. It was Randall, wearing a long coat over his night clothes, his expression one of surprise. He had dark circles under his eyes, as though he'd been up all night. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, a defensive edge to his voice. Maggie held up the peach. "I couldn't sleep. I thought a walk would clear my head. I'm just worried." Randall nodded, gaze shifting to the orchard, as if it were a personal failure. "I am too." He sighed, then reached out to take the damaged fruit from her hands, tossing it aside. "This orchard was my father's pride. Sometimes I think it's cursed me. But I can turn it around. Just need a break in the weather alone, or new seeds. Something." He looked at her, a softness in his eyes that might have been gratitude or love. "Then stay with me, Maggie. Let's get through this together." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to believe in him, believe that she hadn't traveled so far in vain. "I'll do my best," she finally whispered. The next morning, the ranch awoke to chaos. Before the sun even climbed above the horizon, a messenger from the telegraph office galloped onto the property, dismounted hastily, and requested to speak with Maggie. Gil directed him to the main house, where Maggie came to the door, hair still in disarray from sleep. "Miss O'Donnell," the messenger panted. "I have a telegram from Boston. Urgent." Maggie's heart seized. "Yes, that's me." He handed her the folded paper, then retreated. Standing in the entryway, Maggie unfolded it with trembling fingers. 2 lines printed in the harsh staccato typical of telegraph text, "Mother's condition grave." "Stop, I am coming to Texas. Stop, Delilah." Her pulse hammered. Delilah was traveling to Texas. But how and with what money? The day before, no letter had arrived, so Maggie had been left in dreadful silence. Now, with no explanation, her sister announced she was on her way. Something monumental must have happened. Maggie hurriedly sought out Randall, finding him at the breakfast table, picking at a plate of eggs, his appetite waning. His brow furrowed as she showed him the telegram. "I see," he said quietly. "She must have used the money we sent to pay for the trip. Or maybe she borrowed more from someone. If she's coming here, that means your mother's— well, I hope she's not alone." Maggie's stomach twisted. "I don't understand. If Ma is that sick, why would Delilah leave her? Unless Josephine is staying behind to care for her. But what about a doctor?" She paced around the dining room, a storm of worry swirling inside her head. "Randall, I need to talk to Delilah. I need to understand what's happening." He rose, wiping sweat from his brow. "Calm down, Maggie. She'll arrive soon enough. Maybe a week or more by train. We'll find out everything then. But 3 days later, a second letter arrived, this time delivered by the usual stagecoach post. It was from Delilah, penned in her own elegant handwriting. Maggie tore it open in the parlor, while Randall hovered. Dearest Maggie, I hope this letter reaches you before I arrive. Mother's health deteriorated swiftly. We managed to find a local doctor who has done what he can. He says it's consumption, what we feared. Josephine is caring for her. But the cost of medicine grows daily, and we're in arrears on the mortgage. I cannot stand by any longer. You must not feel obligated to marry Mr. Beringer, just for our sakes. Instead, I have decided to come to Texas, so we might come up with a better solution together. If necessary, I will take your place as his bride if you do not wish to go through with it. I cannot see you trapped in a life that brings you despair. We will do what we must. Trust me. I have a plan. With love, Delilah. Maggie's hands shook as she finished reading. The letter implied her sister's willingness to sacrifice her own future, if that's what it took. She glanced at Randall, expecting perhaps anger or frustration. Instead, he looked bewildered, almost hurt. She thinks you might not want to marry me. Because of me. Maggie set the letter on the table. She did not know how to respond. Deep down, a nagging truth clawed at her heart. She had indeed been uncertain. She had also begun to realize that Randall, for all his good intentions, was not the savior she had imagined. The ranch was struggling, and while her pity for him grew daily, so did her unease. Finally, she cleared her throat. Randall, I need to speak honestly. Our agreement was based on the idea that you had a stable ranch that I could send money home quickly. But we both see the ranch is not stable at present. My mother is dying and I'm miles away, unable to help. Delilah is offering herself in my place, if this isn't what either of us wants. Tears welled in Randall's eyes. His cheeks, already flushed with heat, reddened further. So you would just cast me aside? She stepped forward, her tone soft. I didn't say that. But maybe we rushed into this. Maybe a marriage built on necessity alone isn't what's right. The orchard is failing the livestock. Sales aren't meeting your debts, and you told me you need more time. I understand your kindness, truly I do. But perhaps this is a chance to step back. He stood silent for a moment, shoulders slumped. Then with a strangled voice he said, If you don't want to be my wife, I won't force you. I only wanted to help, and maybe find happiness together. But if that's not possible, his voice trailed off. In that instant, Maggie felt both relief and an intense pang of guilt. She took his hands gently. Randall, you deserve a wife who truly wants to be here. I came for my family, but I see now. That isn't a fair foundation for marriage. I'm sorry. I'll write Delilah to stop her from doing something rash. But if you two decide something else, well, that's between you. She's young, she's determined, and I can't control her. His eyes darted away, filled with hurt. Then what will you do? She inhaled shakily. I don't know. I may return home and care for my mother, or perhaps the three of us. Delilah, Josephine, and I will figure out something else. But I can't stay here, Randall, not under these circumstances. I hope you understand. Pain flickered across his face. He bowed his head. I do. I only wish that things had been different. A week later, The train from the east chugged into Amarillo late in the afternoon, its whistle echoing across the dusty platform. Maggie stood on that same spot, where she'd first met Randall, a swirl of unease clenching her stomach. She had come to wait for Delilah, uncertain what to expect. Randall had politely declined to accompany her, retreating into the ranch house with a sadness he did not bother to hide. The train hissed and halted. Passengers disembarked, each wearing the exhaustion of travel on their faces. Then Maggie saw her, a slight figure in a pale blue traveling gown, dusty from the train's journey, stepping onto the platform with determined grace. Delilah O'Donnell was only 18, but she carried herself with a boldness that belied her age. She clutched a small valise and blinked around, searching. Delilah, Maggie called, pushing through the small crowd. They embraced, tears in their eyes, each with 100 questions. For a moment, the swirl of the station's chaos faded as the two sisters held each other. "Oh, Maggie," Delilah breathed. "I've missed you so." Her voice wavered, and Maggie sensed just how frightened she must be under that brave exterior. They found a bench near the station's exit, where Delilah spoke in hushed tones about their mother's health. Catherine had indeed been diagnosed with consumption. Josephine was caring for her as best she could, but the doctor's fees were mounting and the mortgage was in default. "I couldn't stand by," Delilah said, voice trembling. "Mother insisted we not blame you, but Maggie, she's dying, and Josephine can't do it alone." Maggie bowed her head, tears threatening. "I've tried, Delilah. Randall promised to help, but the ranch is not what we thought. He's in debt too." Delilah's eyes flashed. "Then I'll do what needs doing. If we must salvage this arrangement to save our family, I'll marry him myself." Shock flared in Maggie's chest. "Delilah, no. You can't sacrifice yourself that way." Her sister's jaw set. "Sacrifice, perhaps. But if it's a chance to pay for Mother's care, I'll take it. I'm no child, Maggie. I know what I'm risking." She took a breath. "But first I need to see him Randall myself, and see him she did." After a bumpy wagon ride that left Delilah pale from the relentless sun, the two sisters arrived at Golden Briar Ranch. Randall was waiting by the main house porch. Even from a distance, Maggie saw his expression shift from weary resignation to wide-eyed astonishment when he beheld Delilah. Where Maggie was subdued, Delilah glowed with an almost rebellious energy, her hair a shade lighter, her features more delicate. For a moment, Maggie felt an unexpected stab of envy. She had never been the sister who turned heads instantly, but here she was, overshadowed once again. Delilah climbed down from the wagon and approached Randall without hesitation. "Mr. Beringer, I'm Delilah O'Donnell. I'm sorry for the trouble we've caused, but I'm here to remedy it. My family is in desperate need. And you—" She paused, gazing up at him, and a hint of challenge sparked in her eyes. "You need a wife who believes in your ranch." Randall's cheeks reddened. He seemed momentarily speechless. I didn't expect this," he mumbled. "I was prepared to let Maggie go." "That's just it," Delilah said firmly. "I'm not Maggie, and I don't want to leave you to face your debts alone. If you'll still have an O'Donnell bride, I'll be that bride. Maybe we can help each other." Maggie tensed, shooting Delilah a warning look. She had hoped to discuss matters privately before confronting Randall with such an abrupt proposal. But Delilah was brazen, unstoppable. Randall's mouth opened and closed, helpless. "But we only just met." Your sister and I. Delilah reached out to gently touch his arm, ignoring Maggie's glare. I'm not blind to the challenges, but I'm also not afraid of them. If you agree, I'll become your wife. I'll work on this ranch, help with the orchard, do whatever it takes. In return, you'll help me support my mother until... Her voice faltered. Until it's over. Silence settled. Esther, stepping out onto the porch, took in the scene with wide eyes, then discreetly disappeared back inside. Gil stood by the horse stable, his face unreadable. Finally, Randall cleared his throat. Delilah, your offer is surprising. I'm not sure if it's wise. He glanced at Maggie. What do you say? Maggie was torn. She had come here with every intention of leaving, convinced that continuing the engagement was no longer viable. But now, seeing Delilah's fierce resolve and Randall's yearning expression, she felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She had effectively turned away from the arrangement that might save their mother. Should she stand in Delilah's path? I can't tell you what to do, Maggie whispered. But if this is truly your wish, Delilah, think carefully. Randall deserves a wife who's not merely bound by desperation. Delilah lifted her chin. That's my decision to make, Maggie. Then she turned to Randall. Do you accept or not? The heavy moment stretched. Then Randall sighed, squaring his shoulders. All right. If you truly want this, I accept. He stole a glance at Maggie, sorrow flickering in his eyes. I only hope this doesn't drive us all apart. Preparations for a new wedding were unlike anything Maggie had expected. Where she had once been the bride-to-be, she now found herself on the sidelines, watching Delilah and Randall navigate the practicalities of an upcoming ceremony. If the situation was awkward for Maggie, it was doubly so for Randall. He seemed simultaneously relieved and uneasy, as though he feared he might be judged for letting his former fiancée's sister take her place. Still, within days, the ranch was abuzz with activity. Delilah, with her spirited determination, threw herself into learning the ropes. She rose at dawn with Gil the ranch hands, and even attempted to rope a horse one morning, a feat that ended with her landing face first in the dust. But she popped back up laughing and tried again. Randall watched her from the porch with equal parts admiration and worry. That was one of the first moments Maggie noticed a shift in him. He seemed to be warming to Delilah's energy and fearlessness. Esther tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in the house. She had never been much for small talk, but she guided Delilah patiently in the kitchen and the garden. Girl's got spirit, Esther told Maggie in a moment of confidence. Not as shy as you. She might be just what Mr. Beringer needs, someone to light a fire under him. Maggie swallowed the sting of that remark. She told herself she was relieved to be free of an engagement that had weighed on her. And if Delilah found happiness here, so be it. But an uncertain pang lingered in her heart every time she saw Randall stealing glances at her sister. Despite all her rationalizations, Maggie felt replaced, redundant. One afternoon, under the relentless Texas sun, Maggie retreated to the coolness of the parlor to write a letter to Josephine. She wanted to update her about Delilah's new role and learn how Catherine fared. But as she scratched ink across the page, she overheard voices outside the window. Delilah and Randall were talking by the orchard fence, their conversation drifting through the open window. You know, Delilah was saying, laughter in her voice, I always pictured the West as a place for wild adventure. I never thought I'd be wearing aprons and learning how to mend fences. Randall let out a small chuckle. I'm sorry it's not living up to your fantasies. Delilah's voice turned earnest. Oh, it is. Life here is hard, sure, but it feels real. Back home, everything was crumbling, no money. Ma's illness, At least here I can fight for something better." Silence stretched for a moment. Then Randall's tone softened. "I appreciate your spirit, Delilah. Truly. I want to make sure you don't regret this. Marrying me well, it's a risk. It's my choice," Delilah replied. Maggie peered out, watching the two figures, Randall's bulky frame and her sister's slender silhouette. Delilah gazed up at him with a surprising tenderness. "Perhaps we can help each other become who we're meant to be." Randall reached out to brush a strand of hair from Delilah's cheek, his voice hardly audible. "I hope so. God knows I could use a partner with your courage." Then one evening, Randall asked Maggie for a private word in the study. She followed him there, heart pounding, wondering if he wanted to accuse her of something. The study was dim lit by a single lantern, the shelves lined with old ledgers and ranch records. He cleared his throat. "Maggie, I just wanted to say that I'm grateful for everything you did. You came here to help your family. You never meant to hurt me." She nodded, words escaping her. He continued, voice low, "Delilah. She's full of life. I hope to give her a good future. And I hope you don't think I'm discarding you. It's just, you seemed so unhappy." 1,000 replies danced on Maggie's tongue, but she settled for something measured. "You deserve happiness, Randall. We both know that. If Delilah's the one who can build a life with you, then I won't stand in the way." His eyes were wet with unshed tears. "It's all so sudden, but I have to try. She's determined to save your family, and I need to save my ranch." He paused. "I suppose we each must do what we can." Maggie managed a small smile. "Yes, we must." They left the study in strained silence. Outside, the stars stretched across the endless Texas sky, silent witnesses to hearts in turmoil. Maggie stared up at them, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or if by stepping aside she was allowing fate to spin a better story for them all. The wedding day dawned bright and hot, the Texas sun blazing overhead. Delilah wore a simple white dress borrowed from Esther, and refitted with the help of Maggie's sewing skills. Randall, in his best suit, stood by the orchard gate alongside the local preacher, a soft-spoken man named Reverend Powell. The small gathering of ranch hands, led by Gil, looked on with curiosity. This was an unusual wedding after all. Maggie's heart pounded as she watched her sister exchange vows with the man who had once been her fiancé. The ceremony was brief, lacking the pomp of a church wedding, but there was a raw sincerity in the air. When Randall and Delilah shared their first kiss as husband and wife, a whoop went up from the ranch hands, hats tossed in celebration. Delilah blushed while Randall beamed with tentative pride. Randall paled, his large hands trembling. Losing that many cattle was a blow he could not afford. "We have to get them back," he muttered, tone desperate. "Or the ranch. We can't afford this loss." Delilah immediately stepped forward. "Gil, I'll ride with you. We'll track them." Gil shook his head. "No offense, Mrs. Beringer, but you're too green for that. These rustlers might be armed. It ain't a safe venture." Her eyes flashed. "I'm no coward. Maggie, you'll come too." Maggie hesitated, glancing at Randall. She had learned enough horsemanship to ride decently, but the idea of confronting armed thieves sent ice through her veins. Randall turned to her face, ashen. You don't have to go if you don't want to." Before Maggie could respond, Delilah insisted, "We can't leave it all to Gil and the hands. We're part of this ranch too." She threw a glance at Maggie, as if challenging her to abandon her. "I'm going. Who else is with me?" Caught off guard, Maggie felt something stir inside her, an old sense of sisterly protectiveness. "I'll ride," she said, squaring her shoulders. Gil gave a grudging nod. Randall, fear etched across his brow, made a feeble protest. "Let me come too," he offered. But Gil shook his head. "You can't keep pace, Mr. Beringer. Best leave this to me and the others. We need speed and stealth." He paused, reluctant to include Delilah and Maggie, but the sisters' determined expressions left him with no choice. By moonlight, they set out Gil, a couple of ranch hands, Delilah and Maggie. The air was still and hot, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they followed the rustler's trail. Anxiety gnawed at Maggie's gut. She had traveled to Texas to marry a rancher, never imagining she might chase criminals through the wilderness. Hours passed, the land bathed in silver moonlight. At last they spotted movement near a shallow canyon. The stolen cattle clustered at the canyon's mouth, guarded by 3 armed men. Adrenaline surged in Maggie's veins. Gil motioned for silence, then dismounted and crept closer. The plan was to startle the rustlers, round up the cattle, and hopefully avoid a firefight. But plans seldom go smoothly. A shot rang out, slicing the stillness. One of the rustlers had spotted their approach. Chaos erupted. Cattle bellowed, men shouted, and horses reared. Gunfire crackled through the night. Delilah dropped from her saddle, taking cover behind a rock, returning fire with a revolver Gil had handed her earlier. Maggie's heart hammered, and she crouched low, praying not to be hit. Time blurred in the fierce exchange. The rustlers, startled by the number of ranch hands, began to retreat. Gil managed to wing one of them in the shoulder, forcing him to flee on foot. As quickly as it started, it ended. The thieves galloped off, leaving the cattle behind. Gil signaled the others to cease fire. Panting hearts racing, they gathered the scattered herd. In the aftermath, Delilah's eyes gleamed with adrenaline. She helped corral the frightened animals, calming them with soft murmurs. Maggie's hands shook as she clutched the reins of her horse. They had succeeded, but the experience rattled her deeply. They returned to Golden Briar at dawn, weary but triumphant. Delilah swung from her saddle and nearly collapsed into Randall's arms, breathless with excitement. He clutched her, tears of relief coursing down his cheeks. "You're all right," he whispered. "My God, you could have been killed." Delilah only laughed shakily, still high on victory. "We saved your cattle, Randall. The ranch is safe, at least for now." Gil frowned. "Don't seem right to me. I mean, I see the way you look at them and the way you carry yourself. You're stuck." He fell silent, as if he feared he'd spoken out of turn. Surprised by his observation, Maggie nodded. "That's exactly it," she whispered. "I came here for a future, and now I have no place." Gil studied the moonlit branches overhead. "It's not my business, but you deserve more than just hanging around. You're a strong woman, too." Her cheeks warmed. She had rarely heard such a direct compliment from the stoic cowboy. Before she could respond, Gil scratched his chin. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble, but there's something I think you need to know. About Randall." A shiver of apprehension slid through her. "What is it?" Gil's gaze flicked to the house. Randall was desperate for a mail-order bride because, well, it wasn't just about companionship or building a family. It was about saving face. You see, after his father died, he squandered a chunk of the inheritance, some bad deals, some gambling. He keeps that quiet. That's part of why the ranch is in debt. Maggie's breath caught. So the orchard's failure, the drought, those were not the only reasons for the ranch's precarious finances. Gambling? Gil nodded. He got in deep with a man named Calvin Royce, a notorious gambler in Amarillo. Ended up owing him a large sum. Randall's tried to pay it off slowly, but it's weighed on him. The mail-order bride. I suspect he was hoping your family had some means to help bail him out or bring respectability. The revelation settled like a stone in Maggie's gut. She felt anger, confusion, and a flicker of pity. Randall had never mentioned this. Perhaps she would have rejected him outright if she had known. But she also remembered the sincerity in his eyes, the kindness he tried to show. Gil continued, voice low. Delilah's pulling him back on track, but Royce might still come around, demanding the balance. The orchard's not enough to cover it yet. Maggie stared at the moon thoughts in disarray. "Thank you for telling me," she said at last. With a curt nod, Gil tipped his hat. "I figure you deserve the truth." He slipped away into the darkness, leaving Maggie trembling. She realized the entire mail-order arrangement, the reason Randall had been so quick to propose, might have been partly fueled by desperation over his gambling debts. Would Delilah forgive him if she discovered this? The next morning, Maggie rose early, her mind made up. She pulled Delilah aside after breakfast, leading her to a quiet corner of the yard. "We need to talk," she said gravely. Delilah blinked. "What's wrong?" Maggie took a deep breath. "I learned something last night about Randall. He's in debt because of gambling. He never told us." Gil confirmed it. This might be part of why he needed a mail-order bride. Delilah's complexion paled, and Maggie saw the shock in her eyes. "Gambling," she whispered, her tone threaded with hurt. "He never said a word." "Are you sure Gil doesn't lie?" Maggie replied. "What are you going to do?" For a moment, Delilah's eyes flashed with betrayal. Then she set her jaw. "I'm going to confront him. We're married now. We share burdens." Within minutes, Delilah found Randall in the study, rummaging through a pile of bills. Maggie hovered near the door, uncertain whether to offer support or privacy. Delilah closed the door behind her and demanded an explanation. Muffled voices escalated inside. At one point, Delilah's voice broke, tears audible in her words. Randall's baritone rumbled in pleading tones. Maggie felt her throat constrict. Had she just ignited a rift that might destroy what they'd built? When the door finally opened, Delilah emerged with red-rimmed eyes, but her expression was set with determination. Randall lingered behind her, looking crumpled, drenched in guilt. Delilah approached Maggie, voice quavering but resolute. "He admits he made mistakes, owes a man named Royce. But we'll pay it off. We'll find a way." Maggie nodded, though relief was tempered by worry. "I'm sorry to have caused you pain. I only thought you should know the truth." Delilah exhaled. "I'm glad you told me. We can handle it as long as he's honest from now on." She glanced back at Randall. "I married him, Maggie. I won't abandon him no matter how many skeletons he has in his closet." Maggie's heart twisted at the loyalty in Delilah's voice. That was when she realized her sister truly loved Randall. And perhaps for all his flaws, Randall might come to love her just as fiercely. Yet looming over them was the specter of Calvin Royce, a ticking bomb of debt and possible violence. They had staved off rustlers, but could they handle the cunning cruelty of a gambler who wanted his money? In the still air of that summer day, Maggie sensed the final confrontation brewing on the horizon, one that might demand a sacrifice none of them expected. The showdown came sooner than any of them anticipated. Less than a week after Delilah learned of Randall's debt, a stranger appeared at Golden Briar's front gate. He wore a finely tailored coat, despite the heat, and rode a gleaming black horse. Gil, tending to the corral, recognized him instantly and hurried into the house to alert Randall. Calvin Royce dismounted with an air of calculated confidence. His slicked-back hair and neatly trimmed mustache gave him the aura of a city gentleman, though his eyes gleamed with cold intent. He removed his hat and strode toward the porch, ignoring the ranch hands who stiffened at his presence. Randall emerged flanked by Delilah and Maggie. Royce's gaze flicked over them all, lingering on the women. "Randall Beringer," he said in a smooth, mocking tone. "I see you're entertaining a new bride. Congratulations." Randall squared his shoulders, though sweat beaded on his brow. "This isn't a social call, Royce. Name your business." Royce's lips curled into a smirk. "Your debt, of course. By my calculations, you owe me $500 plus interest for every month you've delayed repayment." A hush fell. Delilah held Randall's arm, her expression hardening. Randall swallowed. "I have some funds coming in from orchard sales. I'll pay you what I can, but I need more time." Royce raised a brow. "Your orchard, you say, I hear it's half dead. Time is a luxury, Mr. Beringer, and I've extended it too long." He flicked a glance at Delilah. "Perhaps your lovely wife can expedite matters." Anger flared in Delilah's eyes. "We'll pay you, but you won't harass my husband." Royce chuckled. "Harass, my dear. I'm a businessman, collecting what's owed. If you can't pay the debt in full, I have other means." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a piece of paper. "I happen to have a lien prepared. I'll take over Golden Briar Ranch until every penny is paid." Maggie felt her stomach drop. Randall seemed ready to collapse, shoulders sagging under the weight of Royce's threats. Delilah, however, stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "We'll get the money. I swear it." Royce regarded her intrigued. "You have 1 week. If not, the ranch and everything on it becomes mine." With a mocking tip of his hat, he turned and mounted his horse, riding away with an air of triumph. Despair blanketed Golden Briar. $500 was an enormous sum, especially for a ranch already fighting to stay afloat. Over the next days, Delilah tried every avenue, negotiating with local merchants for loans, pleading with the bank for credit. Maggie, desperate to help, even considered telegraphing Josephine for the last of their father's meager assets. But that sum wouldn't come close to what Royce demanded. As the week wore on, tension ran high. Randall seemed on the verge of a breakdown, haunted by shame for the predicament he'd brought upon everyone. Delilah rallied the ranch hands, pushing orchard and cattle operations to the limit, but the returns were insufficient. Maggie feared that Royce's ultimatum would end in him seizing the ranch. That, dear friends, is how fate took 2 sisters from Massachusetts. One meant to be a mail-order bride, and the other meant to stay behind, and swapped their destinies on a struggling Texas ranch. What began as desperation and disappointment blossomed into a story of loyalty, redemption, and unexpected love. Secrets were laid bare, debts were paid with sacrifice and faith, and a ranch on the verge of collapse found new life under the care of those who refused to give up. If this saga moved your heart, consider sharing it with others who yearn for tales of devotion and courage set against the wide-open plains. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel, so we can continue bringing you wild, untamed stories from the frontier and beyond. Your support helps keep these memories alive, reminding us that hope can rise where we least expect it.